When you think of horror, if you're a smart creature, you'll know that the oldest and most primal kind of fear is the fear of the unknown. The very notion of knowing what something is naturally takes away some of the fear of it, because you now know it to be a tangible thing that you can possibly escape from. The unknown, however, is so vague and unknowable that there will always be a small, inherent, fearful part of you that trembles at the thought. Now, when I discuss the concept of unknowable and intangible terrors, there's probably one writer that crawls into your head like a tentacled slime ball from the dark basement of your mind. H.P. Lovecraft. Yes, he was a pioneer of horror, and he's went on to influence many modern horror icons, including but not limited to Stephen King and Guillermo del Toro. Lovecraft's influence in horror cannot be overstated, but he's far from the only 20th century writer to be influential in the genre. In fact, there's one writer who, I'd argue, actually did a significant amount to contribute to the concept of the fear of unknown things, despite not even trying to. One name you may not expect. Dr. Seuss. Yes, Dr. Seuss, of the Cat in the Hat fame. I mean, if his capacity for horror wasn't apparent anywhere else, he should at least be commended for resulting in that film, because my god, that thing is a trip. Seriously though, Dr. Seuss doesn't get recognised nearly as much as I believe he should when it comes to horror. And that sounds strange to say, but he does have really unsettling concepts in his stories, ranging from creepy creatures to abstract and undescribed things, for lack of a better term. Lovecraft is regarded as bringing the fear of the unknown into storytelling in incredible ways, and I'm not taking away from all that. Only, he's been the topic of numerous video essays regarding cosmic horror and the fear of the unknown, and horror as a genre in general. Dr. Seuss, meanwhile, isn't brought up nearly in the same capacity. As a children's writer, you probably don't imagine he'd be capable of unsettling the reader in his stories of ridiculous rhymes and bright beasties. But you'd be wrong. Quite wrong. Dr. Seuss, intentionally or otherwise, had creepy stuff in his stories, and he utilised some surprising techniques that you'd normally attribute to Lovecraft, or any fanboy wanting to copy his work. Now, I doubt his intention was to terrify, but that doesn't mean his work is totally devoid of horribly effective uses of scary writing techniques. So, in this vein, I wanted to discuss Dr. Seuss as an unintentional hero of horror, one that remains pertinent and creepy even today, that can rival the work of H.P. Lovecraft at his own game, even though Dr. Seuss's writings were far from what Lovecraft's were. I want to bring up a few specific examples of Dr. Seuss's use of horror in his stories, and what he actually achieves with his depictions of some of the creatures or ideas in his stories, whether they be intentionally scary or not. So, let's go. As a baseline, Dr. Seuss's stories usually take place in fantastical worlds full of freaky and fun life forms, with one or two humans at the centre for the reader to connect with as a quote-unquote fellow human being. These stories are whimsical and cheery most of the time, and they always have a positive core message at the centre. That being said, he has a strange way of interjecting some creepy stuff into his stories, things that change the tone of the writing before suddenly going back to being all goofy and rhymey, in a way ignoring what just came before it, like an unloved third child forgotten at the mall. I wanted to focus on a few of these specifically. I won't go into all of the instances, but I'll name a few to kick things off. Firstly, I want to talk about There's a Wocket in My Pocket. There's a Wocket in My Pocket follows a boy who takes the reader on an adventure through his house to show off the various strange creatures who inhabit the place with him. It's all wacky and zany, with nooth-grushes and toothbrushes, and waskets and baskets. It keeps going like this until we reach a certain creature. The Vug under the Rug. These 2 pages are literally darker and figuratively spookier compared to the light-hearted tone of the rest of the book, as the boy sneaks past the one household critter that frightens him. Now these 2 pages, the dark colour palette, and the lack of words spoken about the Vug, would already startle a child reading a colourfully kooky Dr. Seuss book. But there's another factor that I've seen very few people actually comment on. A very effective factor. The Vug is under the rug. Therefore, we don't actually see it compared to the other beings in the book. The boy doesn't describe the Vug to us, nor does he explain why he's scared of it. This void of information and a clear description forces the reader to inject their own fears into the story, to create an image of a Vug that is specific to that reader, and every single individual reader. This kind of intentional lacking of descriptive literacy is something Lovecraft and other horror writers understand and use in their own work. The less you see of or know about a being, the scarier it is. And this is exactly what Dr. Seuss does with the Vug under the rug. It's only 2 pages in a non-horror story, yet it captures the idea of fear of the unknown unbelievably well. Next, let's talk about One Fish, Two Fish, Red Fish, Blue Fish. A simple book without a running storyline, it's instead intended to be a child's first experience with rhymes, and the fun you can have with them. Then, almost out of nowhere, close to the end, these pages appear. Now, I want to quickly comment about how good Seuss's rhyming is, holy god. One Fish, Two Fish remains an incredibly fun book to read for people of any age, honestly. Yes, it's childish, but so what? Not like any of you parents can actually go out to get a more adult book, so why not just refresh your rhymes in the meantime? Anyway, yeah, there's a lot about this specifically that is creepy as hell. The black background, the jagged stairs, the tusked being in the fishbowl. The presentation is surreal and scary enough. Factor in a few more things, however, and it naturally just gets worse. Firstly, why were the kids out in the park in the dark? Were they looking for Clark, or were they just there because their parents are incredibly neglectful? We know they have a mother at least because of the lines on the page, so what the hell's going on? Who would leave Clark in this fishbowl at the park in the dark? Why would they do so? What reason would they have to leave this creature in the park in the dark? In the book, the kids also name pretty much every species of creature they know of. But with this thing, they don't give the name of the species. They just name this one specimen Clark, implying they don't actually know what species he is. That's already unsettling on top of everything else, again playing into the fear of the unknown. But then they decide to just pick him up and take him home with them? They don't even know if their mother will like it. On top of all this, just to really hammer home the creep factor, Clark is looking right at the reader. Not at the kids, not at the stairs, not anywhere else. He's staring straight ahead into the eyes of whoever's unfortunate enough to be reading this Necronomicon ripoff. I don't imagine I need to describe how creepy this is to you, but just because it's a more tangible creature than the Vug under the rug doesn't make his impact any less unsettling, because we still lack most of the information about him and his being. So, well done, Clark. You've creeped me out. Now, please get out of my video for the moment. Ugh. I want to now talk about one more thing that Dr. Seuss made that causes him to stand out as a horror icon. Basically, the entire story called What Was I Scared Of? That is included in The Sneetches and Other Stories. It follows someone as they run errands throughout their little section of the world, when they are suddenly terrorized by a pair of trousers. Trousers that operate independently without a wearer. That description alone sounds like something straight out of a Stephen King short story. The character goes about their existence in constant fear of the green pants with nobody inside them. The pants ride a bike despite not having arms or feet, even row a boat at one point. It even talks at the end despite not even possessing a mouth. The optimistic resolution where the protagonist realizes they're both just as afraid of each other and they set aside their fears doesn't really alleviate the terror. If anything, it raises more questions. Where did the pants come from? Why did they choose this person to chase and terrify? Why now? Why did they suddenly show fear close to the end? How are they able to talk? I feel like I'm going insane trying to understand it, which is a concept popularized by Lovecraft. But in this instance, Dr. Seuss should get credit for establishing this fear of the unknown, using nothing more than a pair of your mum's green sweatpants operating of their own accord. I think it's clear the protagonist is working with the outer gods to allow Nyarlathotep to invade the human populace and wreak havoc. So this thing is actually the antagonist, because it befriends the wretched creature. Sorry for shitting on your childhood, but it's true. These are just a select few instances where Dr. Seuss interjects some kind of horror into his stories. And it was only recently when I had a big think, and I realised that. These concepts may go over children's heads, to an extent, and his stories are not remembered as spooky or horrorish. But that doesn't mean the guy couldn't go outright Lovecraftian on our collective asses every once in a while. Clark, the Vug, and the Green Pants should be remembered as instances in children's stories where the creep factor just shoots straight into the cosmos, whether that's through creepy imagery, vague implications, or a lack of clear descriptions. I'm honestly surprised more people don't talk about Dr. Seuss in regards to horror, because the guy was quite effective at it, whether he intended to be or not. Now I know, I'm likely reading a lot into a little. The Green Pants are probably intended to represent misunderstood fears in general. Once you sit down and discuss things, they're probably not quite as scary as you once thought. Plus, the other person in the conversation is likely just as scared as you are. It's a good message, ultimately, encouraging dialogue and facing your fears to overcome them, and building something better as a result. This doesn't change the fact that from a world-building standpoint, it's still creepy and unsettling. Clark and the Vug represent true fear of the unknown. Because we don't see the Vug or know why the boy's so scared of it, we become cautious of it as a reader. And Clark's lack of a species name, along with the sheer other number of questions unanswered in his appearance, just straight up raises the horror drastically. So parents out there, if you want to get your child afraid of the unknown and lead them down a writing path that will only get creepier and more abstract as it goes on, well, why not get them started with Dr. Seuss? They'll be incanting Yog-Sothoth in no time, I guarantee it.